Okay, so have you ever looked up at the night sky and just wondered what's actually moving around up there? I mean, we're constantly bombarded with news about UAPs and extraterrestrial life, but what if the answer isn't light years away? What if the truth is actually much closer, much older, and honestly, way more shocking? Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to dive deep into a wildly fascinating and, yeah, highly controversial analysis of ancient texts. We're looking at a narrative that lays out a literal cosmic war taking place right above our heads, all entirely contained beneath a solid glass-like firmament. Let's get right into it. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the enclosed biblical cosmology, then move into the ancient watcher incursion, look at forbidden ancient aerial technology, break down the great alien deception, and finally wrap up with the final cosmic conflict. All right, part one, the enclosed biblical cosmology. Now, to really grasp what these sources are talking about regarding these phenomena, you kind of have to undergo a total paradigm shift about the firmament. When we hear that word today, we usually just picture empty outer space. But according to the authors we're looking at, folks like Zen Garcia and Dean Ottle, the ancient literal interpretation is a solid, rigid fault. Think of a physical dome stretched over a flat earth, a hard boundary that essentially locks humanity and these spiritual entities together into one massive enclosed system. And this next part brilliantly illustrates how these researchers anchor their theory directly in scriptural evidence. Take Job chapter 37, verse 18, for example. It specifically describes the sky as being strong and literally like a molten-looking glass. So these sources argue that this isn't just pretty poetry or a metaphor. No, they see it as a literal architectural blueprint of a physical, glass-like dome separating our earthly realm from the waters and the heavens above. So the crucial takeaway here is the absolute stark contrast between two worldviews. On the one hand, you've got the modern heliocentric model, an infinite universe packed with distant galaxies. On the other hand, the biblical enclosed model, a flat earth under a solid firmament where all entities are confined. Researcher Caspio Sargensen brings up a super provocative argument here. He claims that the infinite globe model is actually a carefully calculated deception. Why? Well, his argument is that if you remove the firmament from our collective understanding, you create the illusion of infinite space, right? And that suddenly makes the idea of aliens from other planets seem totally plausible. But if we're in an enclosed system, like he argues, there are no other planets. There are literally only the entities trapped right in here with us. Which brings us to part two, the ancient watcher incursion. Because if we really are in a sealed system, who exactly is sharing this space with us? Well, the timeline of this narrative is sweeping. It kicks off with the gap theory of Genesis 1:2, pointing to an ancient ruin and a pre-existing cosmic rebellion before Adam was even in the picture. Basically, the Earth was already a contested war zone. From there, the timeline moves through the Genesis 6 watcher incursion, the Great Flood, the Tower of Babel, and all the way up to exactly what we're seeing right now with modern UAP disclosure. Let's zoom in on that second point for a second, the incursion. The apocryphal Book of Enoch, which gets heavily referenced in these sources, records a highly specific event. It says 200 angelic beings, known as the Watchers, intentionally abandoned their heavenly estate. They physically descended onto Mount Hermon to interact directly with humanity. And according to the text, they didn't just pop down to say hi or observe. They brought some seriously catastrophic, forbidden knowledge straight into the earthly realm. And the result of that interaction? Well, it was profound and honestly pretty devastating. Genesis 6:4 records that there were giants in the earth in those days. We're talking about the Nephilim. The text described them as the supernatural giant offspring of these fallen angels and human women. The sources we're examining outline how this event thoroughly corrupted the human bloodline, ultimately creating this hybrid civilization that possessed superhuman strength and intellect. All right, part three, forbidden ancient aerial technology. This is where the narrative takes a really fascinating, highly technological turn. I'm sure you've heard of Ezekiel's vision, right? But try looking at Ezekiel's description through a mechanical lens. He describes wheels within wheels, moving with extreme precision, literally lifting off the earth. The sources argue this wasn't some surreal hallucination. Actually, they see it as a brilliant technical illustration of a divine, structured mechanical craft, often referred to as the Merkabah. It's described as a highly advanced aerial vehicle guided by intelligence. But here's the kicker. The text suggests that God's righteous angels were absolutely not the only ones flying around up there. Alongside the divine Merkabah, the fallen watchers allegedly handed down advanced aerial navigation capabilities to their Nephilim offspring. This resulted in the creation of what ancient Sanskrit texts call vimanas, highly advanced aerial craft. But remember that cosmology we talked about earlier? These craft were designed to operate strictly and only beneath the enclosed dome of the firmament. The sources actually break down the specific curriculum taught by these watchers. And they weren't just teaching basic agriculture. No, they were handing over the engineering blueprints for an advanced civilization. We're talking complex metallurgy, advanced weaponry, chemical enchantments, and, crucially, celestial mechanics and aerial navigation. They literally taught humanity how to navigate the atmosphere of the enclosed Earth. And while those specific capabilities were wiped out by the Great Flood, the sources suggest that the echoes of that technology still remain in ancient megaliths and myths all over the world. Moving on to part 4, the Great Alien Deception. So, how does all this ancient history actually affect us today? Well, to understand the modern phenomenon, the sources point straight to Ephesians 2:2. This verse refers to the adversary as the prince of the power of the air. Notice the massive importance placed on that word air. It signifies that these fallen entities are specifically confined to the atmospheric realm right above us, physically beneath the firmament. They aren't floating out in deep space, they are actively operating right here in our skies. Based on this exact framework, the texts provide a clear 3-part taxonomy of what our governments are currently labeling as unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs. First off, some are righteous angels on divine errands, essentially the modern-day Merkaba. Second, and according to the sources most prominently, they are the fallen watchers and demonic entities literally masquerading as extraterrestrial aliens. And third, they are directed spiritual atmospheric manipulations. The absolute key takeaway here: none of them are from another planet. Researchers like Ryan Peterson and Gary Wayne outline what they call the deception protocol, and it's a very specific step-by-step strategy. Step 1, promote the globe model to hide the firmament. Step 2 is framing these confined entities as highly evolved extraterrestrials. Step 3 is the current government disclosure we're seeing, basically conditioning the public to accept their presence. And Step 4 is the ultimate goal: presenting themselves as our ancient creators returning to guide us and ultimately demanding our worship. Now, the sources also make a highly polarizing claim about how this deception impacts our actual biology. They argue that modern movements toward transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and even mRNA genetic manipulation are not actually new phenomena. Instead, they frame these technologies as a direct technological continuation of that Genesis 6 Watcher incursion. Just as the Watchers allegedly tried to corrupt the divine human image by creating the hybrid Nephilim, these sources argue that modern genetic engineering is the exact same strategy, just recycled and updated for our current technological age. Which leads us to our final section, Part 5, the final cosmic conflict. So we have a contested, enclosed realm, ancient fallen entities, and a massive modern deception. How does this epic, millennia-spanning war actually resolve? Well, the climax of these texts is truly spectacular. The ultimate victory isn't described as some quiet, spiritual metaphor. No, it's prophesied to be a massive, physical, aerial confrontation. The return of Christ is framed as an overwhelming celestial event where divine forces definitively reclaim the skies. The sources describe it as an event that shatters the Nephilim deception forever and completely casts down the prince of the power of the air once and for all. Which leaves us with this final, really profound question to consider. When we see unexplainable lights and structured craft maneuvering in our skies, are we truly being visited by highly evolved beings from distant galaxies? Or, as these sources argue, are we experiencing the final, calculated deception of ancient, fallen entities who have literally been confined beneath a solid dome with us since the dawn of time? It's a massive paradigm shift that fundamentally changes how we view the heavens. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep your eyes on the skies and definitely keep questioning what you see.